G'day guys and welcome to this episode of Service My Ride. So a few weeks ago I was contacted by Narva Australia and asked if I would like to collaborate on producing an install video on their new 4x4 high powered LED work lamps. So on today's episode I'll be installing 3 different sets of work lights, all with a different method to wire each set. And these work lamps operate between 9 and 36 volts and they're all fully sealed with a rating of IP68. So I've already got these lights mounted onto the nudge bar, so let's get started. And this is going to be the easiest install on the video. We are going to be using the pre-existing wiring from the light bar to connect our new work lights. So the first thing we need to do is disconnect the battery. We can now remove the cable and place that to the side. And we'll need to remove the power wire of pin 30 off the relay. And this is going to be the positive wire from the LED light bar. So we're going to remove the wires back out through the grill so we can gain access to the wire. And because we already have a power supply, we're just going to bridge the wires from the work lights back into the positive and negative of the light bar. Now you don't want to cut this wire too short, give yourself a little bit extra wire, grab your wire cutters and then we can cut the wire. And we can simply just remove the insulation from both negative and the positive wire. And you'll want to trim between 6 to 10 mil of that insulation. Then we can give the wires a twist to make sure that there's no loose wires that's going to hang out, that's going to interfere with our connection. And then with the negative and positive wires from our work lamps, we can also take the insulation off those wires as well. And then we can simply join the wires together. Twist the 2 black wires or the negative wires together, and before we put it into the wire connector, we're just going to slide over some heat shrink and then we can add our wire connector. Now if you want to solder these wires you can, but we are going to be using the wire connectors. And as with any wires, when you're connecting them, make sure that you put the connectors on nice and tight. Once you've crimped the wire connection to the cable, give it a slight pull to make sure it's on nice and tight and that it's not going to fall off later on. Then we can slide the heat shrink over the connection. And by using a lighter on the heat shrink, that'll seal our connection. And following the same process as the negative wire, we can now twist the 2 positive wires together. And then sliding on our heat shrink, we can now attach the wire connector. Now what we need to do is extend these wires to take it back to the relay. So once we plug the positive wire in, we can take that straight back to pin 30 on the relay, and the negative wire is the same. We never undid this wire, we just had to extend it. Now we can clean up all the wiring so that it gives it that professional finish. And we're going to run all the wires in behind the grill, and we're going to use cable ties to keep it nice and neat. Once you've got all your wires running nice and neat in behind the grill, the last thing we need to do is connect that negative terminal back to the battery, and then tighten it up with the 10mm socket. Now we can move on to the next set of work lights. I've mounted these to the side of the roll bar and I can turn these a full 360 degrees. There is 2 10-watt LEDs throwing out a massive 1800 lumens, and that'll be thrown in the flood pattern. And these work lamps operate between 9 and 36 volts and they're all fully sealed with a rating of IP68. And to wire these lights we're going to be using a relay. So we're going to need the fuse. I've got a block for the relay which makes wiring a lot easier, and plus if you've got quite a few relays, these all lock in together so it keeps all your relays nice and neat. And finally we've got the auxiliary lights rocker switch. Now depending where you're going to mount these lights, we're going to mount these lights on the roll bar and run all the wires through the piping. And this isn't only just going to protect the wires, it's also going to make the job look nice and neat. Now we've got all the wires running through the roll bars, I've labelled each wire for each individual light. And what I've done here is I've mounted all the wires and connected all the negative wires together so we can earth it to the side of the tub. Then we can run the positive wires inside the tubing in behind the tub liner. And I've removed the tail light just so that I can run the wires and get them underneath the car. And you want to make sure that you've got enough wire, so lay all the wire out alongside the car so that you're going to have enough to run from the back into the front of the engine bay. Once we've got all our cable laid out, we can now start to cable tie it underneath the car. And by following the factory wiring harness, it's going to keep all our wires together. So I'm going to run all the wires inside the chassis from the back of the car all the way to the front of the engine bay. So as usual, if we're doing any electrical work on the car, we're going to disconnect the battery. So we can loosen the negative terminal and remove the wire. So the first wire that we're going to connect to the relay is going to be our fuse, and we're going to wire that up to pin 30 on the relay. And before we mount the fuse holder into the car, we're going to insert the 25 amp fuse into the holder. Push it in so the fuse is nice and firm, and then you can replace the waterproof cap. So on one end of the fuse, we need to connect straight to the positive terminal on the battery. So remove the nut from the positive terminal so we can attach our fuse wire. And by using the eyelet connection, we can slide it straight over the bolt, then reinstall the nut so that we have a firm connection. And on the other end of that fuse, we want to connect it straight to pin 30 on the relay. The next wire that we need to connect is from pin 86 on the relay, and that's going to go through the firewall of the car and connect to pin 3 on the switch. So first we're going to connect the wire onto the relay block. Feed it into the bottom of the block until it clicks into place. And by using one of the grommets on the firewall, we can push the wire into the cabin of the car. And once the wire comes through to the footwell of the passenger side, we can pull all the wire through so that we've got enough to reach the switch. So now we can attach the wire straight to position 3 on our switch. Now while we're here, we may as well connect our earth wire to pin 8, and because it's only an earth wire, we don't need to run an individual wire to all the switches. We can bridge it across all 4 switches. And all I've done here is bridge into the earth wire and made 3 outlets from the 1 wire. And for our trigger wire, I'm going to use a double blade fuse wire tap. And these are great to use as a trigger wire. And we're going to plug this straight into the fuse box. So the blue fuse you can see there, that's the 15 amp that we removed from the fuse box. And the top one is the 7.5 amp, and that's going to be the trigger wire for our lights. Then we can install this wire just like it's a fuse straight back into the fuse box. And then we can attach our trigger wire to position 2 on the switch. We can now go back to the engine bay and connect our lights to pin 87 on the relay. So we've fed all the wires up through the chassis rail up into the engine bay. Now we can pull them all up nice and neat. So if you're looking at the relay, down the bottom is pin 87. That is what we're going to connect that power wire straight from our lights straight to the relay. And our last wire we need to connect is on pin 85 of the relay, and that's going to be our earth wire. And using a self-tapping screw, we want to secure this firmly to the side of the engine bay. And as you can see, I've got all the relays all lined up, nice and secure, hiding all the wires so that it's nice and neat. Now we can return the negative wire back to our battery. And the last set of work lamps we're going to connect to the roll bar, and these are going to be additional reverse lights. And these lights have 5 high-powered 3-watt LEDs with over 1,000 lumens per light. Combined total, that's of over 2,100 lumens we're adding to our reverse light. And that'll be thrown in the flood pattern. And these work lamps operate between 9 and 36 volts, and they're all fully sealed with a rating of IP68. So with the previous set of work lamps that we installed, we've run the same wires in the harness to come through behind the tail light. The red wire that I'm holding is for our reverse lights, and the white wire is for our work lamps we attached to the side of the roll bar. And if you're going to connect it straight to the reverse lamp, you just need to find the positive wire that goes to the globe and bridge straight onto the positive wire. But we want to have the option of using a switch so that we can turn the lights on and off whilst using reverse. So with the last set of work lamps that we installed, we also added the reverse lamp to run in the same wiring harness. And these wires we ran through the chassis rail up to the engine bay. Now that we have the wires up into the engine bay, we can now single out the reverse light power lead. And we're going to run the wire through the grommet in the firewall, and we can pull all that wire through so that it'll reach to the driver's side to connect to the switch. So on the back, we've already connected the earth wire to position 8, and we're going to use our trigger wire from the fuse box again. This time we're going to plug it directly into the fuse for the reverse lights. So now we've got our trigger wire installed, and we've run the wires in behind the dash. We can now connect it to position 2 on the switch. And the last wire that we need to connect to the switch on position 3 is our positive wire that's coming directly from the lights that we ran up through the chassis rail and in through the engine bay. So now that we have all our switches wired up, we can now run all the wires nice and neat, cable tied up behind the dash, and then you want to mount your switches somewhere on the dash that's accessible. Now to finish the install off and make this look really professional, we're going to be installing some of this flexible tubing just to protect our wires to the work lamps. So that's 3 different ways on how you can wire up your 4x4 high-powered LED work lamps from Narva. So this is my first collaboration I've done since I've been on YouTube, and I'd like to thank Narva for reaching out and making this possible. So now you know how to install your 4x4 high-powered LED work lamps. Get out there and give it a go.